problem isn't the infrastructure failing. The fact is that devices operate as a kind of black box to everyone but the manufacturer without an extraordinary investment into reverse engineering. This is done for a number of commercial reasons to prevent sort of copying and cloning devices. But it means the real problem isn't that, a foreign manufacturer could put a compromised device in our network, right, that they shipped over and it's evil. Of course they could, right? We, the United States, you, Canada, do this to other countries every day. Everyone does. The problem is that our protocols and our paradigms, our architectures are designed in such a way that if there is a bad device on our path, it's a problem at all. We are very vulnerable to this sort of midpoint manipulation. Something that was in the stories of 2013 was not just that the United States government was spying on communications in transit, but they were actually poisoning. If you visited an unencrypted website, right? Because remember we talked about encryption before. If you requested an encrypted website and they didn't have a key to read that encryption, they wouldn't be able to see exactly what subpage of the website, what this image looks like, what this code is, manipulated. But if it's an unencrypted copy of the website, what they can do is they can see you're requesting, blankpage.com, and they can get a copy of that first using their very expensive connections, right? They can then take that copy, that unencrypted copy, put a little evil bug in it, right? Malicious code in it, and then send it back to your computer as if it was sent to you from the server of blankpage.com, spoofing a legitimate page, and then they've poisoned your computer, right? They've hacked you, basically, and you didn't see it happen. It looks like you just got the normal, ordinary page, and the server doesn't know you didn't get it. It's just anyone in the middle has an advantage in terms of surveillance, in terms of manipulation, and these governments have become very comfortable occupying that position for themselves. And there are a lot of arguments to go, okay, maybe we want to do this, maybe this is beneficial, maybe we don't, right? But it's not just Huawei, right? Huawei is being used as an example because it's interesting in the trade war. This is Intel, right? This is Amazon's sort of AWS cloud, this platform that everybody's running. This is Cisco devices. This is anything that's in the middle has an advantage. And we could go into any depth in this later on if you're interested in it. But this is very much a structural problem. And until we change our protocols, the language, the sort of machine languages that we use for devices to communicate with each other in a way that they are not as vulnerable to this midpoint manipulation, this will be a recurring problem. And then the final point of these 3 points that I wanted you to get, which sort of are the structural points: overcollection and oversharing, that's one, the infrastructure in the middle and supply chain manipulation. And the third is the commercial trade and software exploits. I don't have much time, so I'm going to cover this quickly, but I mentioned briefly in the beginning that most of the sort of best digital weapons that the NSA has, right, that the Israeli Mossad has, and the French DGSE has, the Russian FSB, the Chinese MSS, right? These come from commercial exploit development companies. These are private enterprises that exist for only a sole purpose, and that's to find the most popular applications and operating systems and devices in common use in the world. This is the critical infrastructure of our digital society, and attack them. And what they want to find is a weak point that is universal to every device of this kind, every application of this, ideally, future versions for the coming years, that if you know about this vulnerability, you can craft an attack that will allow you to basically take over these devices remotely, right? Hack them. And somebody else paid for the device, but now the hacker owns it. And this is not a small industry. One of these tools was sold by an Israeli company that's owned by a US venture capital firm called the NSO Group, that was exposed by a Canadian research team that, honestly, I have to say is the best in the world at tracking this whole sort of sector. And Citizen Lab revealed that the Israeli company sold this to the Mexican government, and it was for millions and millions of dollars. I can't remember how much it was. And the Mexican government then used it to spy on the president of the Mexican Senate, the opposition, a journalist who had written a story exposing the Mexican president as being involved in corruption, and her child, because they had difficulty getting to her directly. Human rights defenders and activists, people who were looking for missing students. And this has happened again and again. The Saudis bought it and they used it in the operation against Jamal Khashoggi's friends. Jamal Khashoggi is the journalist who was murdered in Saudi Arabia's Turkish consulate. And the idea here, just to understand this on a policy level, is that this is a policy problem. And it will not be fixed until you lobby your governments to criminalize the trade in exploits. Note that I say trade, not research, not production, right? Neither of which can feasibly be done or really even should be forbidden because they infringe on academic ethics, right? And it's sort of freedom of speech and experimentation. But we can promote legislation that criminalizes the sale of information about any hardware or software vulnerability that has not been reported to the developer of that hardware or software, right? And then we can provide a venue or venues and mechanisms for victims of the commercial exploit trade to win damages in your jurisdictions, both from the company and from those who have invested in it. And the reason this is important, because it's particularly for computer science students in the room, your code is not secure today, right? You know that, I know that. And it probably never will be, no matter how much you invest in it, whether that's time or resources, particularly if you start a company, because the other developers you work with and you yourself are writing tools, primarily in programming languages that aren't even memory safe. And you're deploying them on platforms that weren't designed for security. And these platforms are being operated by third parties whose activities you are not permitted to oversee, much less influence, right? Even if you throw a few $1 million at somebody who's claiming they have a magic wand to make these problems go away, you'll say goodbye to your money, but you won't say hello to security. It is the ecosystem that is the problem. And it is our decisions as a society that have allowed this ecosystem that is very much poisoned, is polluted and toxic to public digital life to come to pass. But just as decisions got us here, decisions can take us from here to a better and brighter rather than darker future. The last closing point before I turn it over to questions is what we see happening in politics around the world today. There's a rise of authoritarianism that I think everyone can feel in every country. Canada is, in relative terms, doing much better than the rest of the world, but I know you feel it and are impacted by it as well today. And one of the things that I think is quite chilling is that one of the sort of criticisms that's been brought against me, which I welcome you to bring if you'd like to hear me sort of respond to it later on in the question segment, is that there has to be some accountability to law, right, if it means something. And regardless of whether you think what I did was right or wrong, regardless of whether you think mass surveillance is a violation of human rights, as Europe and every constitutional scholar in the United States and the United Nations agrees, or you think these are sort of necessary vital tools or whatever you have, everyone agrees, or likely many people agree, that I broke a law in the United States, a law that forbids you from disclosing classified information, even to journalists, even in the public good, because that's the law. Even if it's bad law, even if it's harmful in its effect and its impact, even if it was passed, as it was in 1917, by President Woodrow Wilson, so he could, quote unquote, crush the opposition to the United States involvement in a very unpopular war at the time. That was the law. And yet we see the same bodies that are supposed to be upholding the law, particularly for, rather than sort of powerless whistleblowers, people at the working level on the lower echelons of society, We see it now with the United States Department of Justice itself.